Most people will spend 40 years fighting a war they were never trained to win. They wake up early. They work hard. They save what little is left. And somehow, decade after decade, the finish line keeps moving further away. This isn't bad luck. It isn't a lack of effort. It is the result of fighting a financial war using no strategy at all. 25 centuries ago, a general named Sun Tzu wrote a text that armies would study for thousands of years. He never once mentioned money. And yet nothing has ever explained wealth more precisely than his words on conflict, positioning, and power. Sun Tzu understood something most people never learn in school: the battle is won or lost long before the fighting begins. Every army that lost was already defeated in its planning. Every soldier who struggled was already outmatched in preparation. The same is true of money. The person who stays broke isn't losing because they don't work hard enough. They're losing because they entered the wrong battlefield with the wrong weapons, using someone else's strategy. This is not a video about budgeting. It is not a video about side hustles or motivational slogans. This is about something deeper: the hidden architecture the wealthy use to win financial wars before anyone else even notices a war is happening. There are 7 rules embedded in Sun Tzu's philosophy. Rules that separate those who quietly build fortunes from those who spend their entire lives working for someone else's fortune instead. Most people will never hear these rules explained this way. Not because the information is secret, but because the system rarely rewards those who understand it. By the end of this video, you will see money differently. You will recognize the invisible battlefield you've been standing on your entire life. And you will understand exactly where you've been fighting wars you were destined to lose. Sun Tzu warned that the general who knows both himself and his enemy will never be in danger. The average person knows neither. They don't know their own financial terrain. And they certainly don't understand the forces working against them. That changes now. Let's begin with Rule 1, the rule that decides whether you win or lose before you ever take a single financial action. Sun Tzu observed that victorious warriors win first, and then go to war, while defeated warriors go to war first, and then seek to win. This single sentence carries more financial wisdom than most personal finance books ever written. Most people believe wealth is built through effort. Wake up earlier. Work longer hours. Hustle harder. But Sun Tzu never measured victory by effort. He measured it by preparation. An army that marches into battle without knowing its supply lines, its terrain, or its enemy's weaknesses is not brave, it is doomed. And yet this is exactly how most people approach money. They take a job. They accept a salary. They spend whatever is left over. They call this a financial plan. It isn't. It's improvisation dressed up as effort. Consider 2 people earning the exact same income. The first wakes up each day and reacts, pays bills, checks the account balance, hopes there's enough left over at the end of the month. The second has already decided, months in advance, where every dollar is positioned before it even arrives. Same income. Same hours worked. Completely different outcomes. One is fighting a battle with no map. The other already won the war in the planning room, long before the money ever moved. This is not about frugality. This is not discipline for its own sake. Sun Tzu never celebrated suffering, he celebrated preparation that makes suffering unnecessary. The wealthy do not work harder in the moment of crisis. They work harder long before the crisis has a chance to form. By the time the average person finally sits down to evaluate their situation, it's already too late, the year is closing, the money is gone, and the war was lost before it ever began. But preparation alone isn't enough. Even the most disciplined general will lose if he chooses to fight on ground that favors his enemy. This is where even hardworking, careful people quietly sabotage themselves without ever realizing it. Which raises an uncomfortable question: what if the terrain itself was never built for you to win on? Sun Tzu taught that the general who understands the ground will win, and the general who ignores it will be defeated no matter how strong his army is. Terrain, in his philosophy, was never neutral. Some ground offers cover, high vantage points, and room to maneuver. Other ground traps an army in a valley where it can be surrounded and destroyed, regardless of skill or courage. Money works the same way. Two people can work equally hard, yet one stands on terrain built for growth while the other stands on terrain built to be consumed. A salary with no ownership, no equity, and no scalability is a valley. No matter how many hours are poured into it, the ceiling was fixed before the first day of work. A skill that can be repackaged, sold, licensed, or scaled is high ground. The same hours produce compounding, expanding results. This is not a judgment of any particular job. It is a recognition that effort spent on the wrong terrain is effort spent defending a position that was never designed to make you wealthy. A retail employee and a freelance designer might work identical hours in a week. One trades time for a fixed wage that resets to zero every month. The other builds a portfolio, a reputation, and pricing leverage that grows with every project completed. Same hours. Entirely different battlefield. The wealthy rarely announce this distinction out loud, but they act on it constantly. They ask a question most people never think to ask: does this terrain reward accumulation, or does it only reward survival? Naval Ravikant has often pointed to this exact distinction, the difference between renting out time and owning leveraged assets, whether that asset is code, capital, or a brand. But choosing the right terrain means nothing if the enemy operating on that terrain remains invisible. And this enemy is far closer, and far more familiar, than most people are willing to admit. Sun Tzu warned that if you know neither yourself nor your enemy, you will lose every battle. Most people assume their financial enemy is other people, competitors, employers, the wealthy, the system. But the real enemy rarely wears a face. It hides inside habits, comfort, and normalized behavior that feels harmless in the moment and devastating over a decade. Debt is one form of this enemy, not the debt used strategically to acquire assets, but the quiet, revolving debt that finances a lifestyle no income can actually support. Inflation is another, a silent force eroding the value of money sitting still, punishing those who never learn to move their wealth into anything that grows. And perhaps the most dangerous enemy of all is manufactured desire, the carefully engineered feeling that a new purchase, upgrade, or experience is required to feel successful. This enemy shows up disguised as achievement. Consider the common scenario of lifestyle creep: someone earns a raise, and almost immediately, spending rises to match it. A better car. A bigger apartment. Nicer dinners. On the surface, this looks like progress. In reality, income increased while financial position stayed exactly the same, or worse, became more fragile, since expenses now require that higher income to simply survive. Rockefeller, one of the wealthiest men in history, was famously disciplined about avoiding this exact trap. While many of his contemporaries spent lavishly to display new fortunes, he continued reinvesting, understanding that visible wealth and actual wealth were two entirely different battles. Those who confused the two rarely kept their fortunes for long. The tragedy is that this enemy rarely announces itself. It doesn't feel like defeat, it feels like celebration, comfort, or reward. By the time most people recognize the pattern, years of compounding potential have already been spent on things that compound nothing at all. Understanding this enemy is only half the battle. Even the most disciplined person can still lose everything by acting at exactly the wrong moment, which is precisely where Sun Tzu's next principle becomes essential. Sun Tzu believed that speed was the essence of war, that a prolonged campaign, no matter how well resourced, would eventually drain even the strongest army. He warned that no nation has ever benefited from a war that dragged on too long, because delay bleeds resources that decisive action would have preserved. In financial terms, this principle cuts both ways. Reckless speed destroys wealth. But so does endless hesitation disguised as caution. Most people believe patience and delay are the same thing. They are not. Patience is holding a position with clear intent, waiting for the right moment to act. Delay is avoiding a decision altogether, hoping the discomfort of choosing will simply disappear. Sun Tzu's armies moved decisively once the terrain was understood and the enemy was known, not before, and not long after. History offers a sharp illustration of this. Napoleon's campaign into Russia stalled through indecision and poor timing, stretching supply lines past their breaking point until the delay itself became the defeat, not the enemy's strength. The lesson translates directly into money. An opportunity evaluated too slowly often becomes a loss, even if the original decision would have been sound. Consider two investors presented with the same opportunity. One spends months in analysis paralysis, waiting for certainty that will never arrive, until the opportunity is gone or its cost has doubled. The other studies the terrain quickly, accepts calculated uncertainty, and acts while the window is still open. Neither is reckless. But only one understood that timing itself is a form of strategy, not an afterthought to it. This is where opportunity cost becomes the silent tax on hesitation. Every month spent waiting, until things feel safer, is a month of compounding that can never be recovered. The wealthy rarely act impulsively, but they act decisively once preparation is complete. Yet timing alone will not protect a position from a far quieter threat, one that has nothing to do with when you act, and everything to do with what you reveal while doing it. Sun Tzu taught that all warfare is based on deception: appear weak when you are strong, and appear strong when you are weak. On the surface, this sounds like manipulation. In wealth building, it becomes something closer to discipline, the art of concealing your position until concealment is no longer necessary. Most people do the opposite. The moment resources grow even slightly, the instinct is to display it: a new car, a visible upgrade, something that signals arrival. Sun Tzu would recognize this instantly as a tactical error. Revealing strength before consolidating it invites attack, from taxes, from social pressure, from lifestyle expectations that quietly drain the very gains being celebrated. An army that announces its position before it's ready to defend it is not being confident. It is being careless. The wealthy tend to move in the opposite direction. Warren Buffett, one of the richest people alive, still lives in the same modest house he purchased decades ago. Not because he can't afford otherwise, but because he understood something most people never do: status broadcast too early becomes a liability, while capital left quietly compounding becomes a fortress. This isn't about hiding out of shame. It's positioning, executed with patience. Picture two colleagues who both receive the same bonus. One immediately upgrades their car, eager for others to notice the change. The other says nothing, redirects the money into an appreciating asset, and continues showing up exactly as before. A year later, one has a depreciating object and a slightly heavier financial burden. The other has capital that has already begun compounding, invisible to everyone around them, including, often, the people who were quick to judge their modest lifestyle. This is not deception in the sense of dishonesty. It's the recognition that premature visibility invites unnecessary resistance, social, psychological, even competitive. The wealthy aren't hiding from the world. They're simply refusing to fight battles they were never required to enter. But no one builds real fortune in isolation. Even the most disciplined strategist eventually needs forces beyond their own, which brings us to a principle Sun Tzu considered essential to any lasting victory. Sun Tzu understood that no army wins solely on its own strength. He advised commanders to use the strength of allied states, to combine forces where possible, and to avoid the costly mistake of fighting every battle in isolation. A general who refuses all alliances is not more honorable, he is simply weaker, by choice. This principle is one of the most overlooked in personal finance. Many people equate self-reliance with virtue, believing that true success must come entirely from their own labor. But the wealthy rarely build fortunes alone. They borrow capital strategically. They partner with people whose skills complement their own. They use platforms, networks, and systems built by others to multiply the reach of their own effort. This isn't weakness, it's leverage, and leverage was one of Sun Tzu's most consistent themes. Andrew Carnegie, often remembered as a self-made industrialist, was in truth a master of alliance. He surrounded himself with specialists in steel production, finance, and distribution, people who understood pieces of the puzzle he didn't. Carnegie's genius wasn't doing everything himself. It was recognizing which battles to hand off, and to whom. Consider a small business owner who insists on handling every function alone: marketing, accounting, operations, sales. Compare this to another owner who partners with a distributor, hires a specialist for the one weak link in the business, and uses existing platforms rather than building everything from scratch. Both may work equally hard. Only one is fighting with reinforcements. This extends beyond business into everyday financial life. A mentor who has already solved a problem can save years of costly trial and error. A well-chosen partnership can open doors that decades of solo effort might never reach. Even borrowed capital, used with discipline, becomes a force multiplier rather than a burden. Sun Tzu never treated alliance as dependency, he treated it as strategy. The general who understands when to stand alone, and when to combine forces, wins battles the isolated general never even sees coming. And this brings us to the final, highest principle, the one Sun Tzu considered the truest mark of mastery. Sun Tzu declared that supreme excellence does not consist of winning 100 battles. Supreme excellence is subduing the enemy without ever fighting at all. This single idea sits above every other principle in his philosophy, and it may be the most misunderstood concept in all of wealth building. Most people equate financial success with constant motion. Trading. Hustling. Chasing every opportunity that appears. But Sun Tzu's greatest generals were not the ones who fought the most battles, they were the ones who arranged circumstances so favorably that battle became unnecessary. Applied to money, this means avoiding unnecessary financial conflict altogether, the bad debt that never needed to exist, the status competition that drains resources for nothing but appearance, the impulsive risk taken only because patience felt unbearable in the moment. Compounding is the purest expression of this principle. It requires no daily battle, no dramatic action, no visible struggle. It simply requires a position established early, left undisturbed, allowed to grow on its own terms. The investor who buys quality assets and does nothing for 20 years often outperforms the one constantly trading, constantly fighting, constantly reacting. One is at war with the market every day. The other has already won, quietly, by refusing to fight in the first place. This is where all 6 previous rules converge. Preparation determines the terrain you'll stand on. Understanding the terrain reveals which battles are worth entering. Knowing the true enemy prevents wasted energy on the wrong fight. Timing determines when to move. Discipline and visibility protects what's been built. Alliances multiply what one person alone could never accomplish. And the final rule ties them together: the wisest strategist arranges their entire position so that fighting becomes optional, not required. The average person spends a lifetime at war with money. The strategist simply positions themselves so the war never needs to happen. 7 rules. 1. Shift in identity. You did not come into this video to learn tricks, hacks, or shortcuts. You came to understand something far more valuable, that wealth was never about working harder than everyone else. It was about seeing the battlefield clearly, while most people fight blindfolded. Sun Tzu never wrote about money. He wrote about war, positioning, timing, and the quiet mastery of circumstances before the first move is ever made. And yet nothing explains the gap between the wealthy and the struggling more precisely than his words. The wealthy prepare before they act. They choose terrain that rewards them instead of draining them. They name their true enemy instead of fighting shadows. They move with timing, not impulse. They conceal their position until concealment is no longer necessary. They build alliances instead of insisting on isolation. And above all, they arrange their lives so that unnecessary battles simply never happen. You are no longer the person who wakes up reacting to bills, hoping the numbers work out by month's end. You are someone who understands that the war is won or lost long before the money ever moves. That is not a small shift. That is the exact line separating those who spend 40 years fighting and those who spend 40 years building. Nothing here requires more hours in the day. It requires a different relationship with the battlefield you've been standing on all along. Sun Tzu said the wise general wins first, and then goes to war. You now know what that means with money, and more importantly, you know why almost no one is ever taught this. The strategy has been laid out. The next move belongs to you. If this resonated, consider what rule you're weakest in, and start there.